So my name is Geraldine O'Reilly and I work at Clio as Community and Events Manager, and I'm delighted to be bringing you today's event. This is the 7th in our year-long Making of a Law Firm series. We are past our halfway point, so well done, Kim and Alistair. Starting a law firm is tough and building your firm can be even tougher. So we decided to support the community via an online monthly event series that will run throughout 2021 and follow 4 law firm leaders who are on the road to building new and successful UK law firms. Today, we will be discussing all things hiring, how to find and recruit the best candidates to grow your firm. Today and throughout the year, it would be really appreciated if you could share your support for the series and for our leaders on social media using the hashtag Making a Law Firm. Our leaders are kindly taking time out of running busy startups to come and share their experiences with the community. So they do deserve a thank you here and there along the way. This morning, we have asked 2 of our 4 leaders to rejoin us for this subject. So we've got Kim Cross, partner at Vine Law. Kim is a solicitor who initially qualified in Australia and moved to the UK in 2009. Along with co-founders Melinda Smith and Kath Collins, Kim started Vine Law in 2020 with the mission to build a firm that focuses on providing exceptional client service and is a great place to work. And we've got Alistair rejoining us. Alistair is founder and director at Tend Legal. So Alistair is an experienced commercial solicitor. He co-founded Tend Legal with his wife Shona in 2020, and with the aim of finding a better way to deliver amazing legal services to startups and SMEs. Alistair is known for his approachable manner, zen-like calm, and clear commercial legal advice. We've also asked a special guest to join us today. So we have subject matter expert joining us, Duane Cormell, founder, co-founder and director of Realm Recruit, a specialist legal recruitment consultancy and legal job coach, which is kind of what it says on the tin, providing advice, guidance and coaching to those seeking a new legal role. So welcome, Duane, for joining. Thank you for joining us. Duane believes that when it comes to work-life balance, life is the more important of the 2. And that's something that he tries to put at the center of both businesses. So really, really fantastic to have you here, Duane. So before we get into it today, I do want to cover off on a couple of things. So today's session will be the usual 60 minutes. We want lots of Q&A. So if you do have questions, pop them in the chat throughout. If you have comments, pop them in the chat. If you select the drop down and select everyone, that means all panelists, all attendees will see your comment or your question, or you can use the Q&A function to ask questions directly to the panelists, and we'll bubble that up during the Q&A session. Great. So as mentioned, I work at Clio, and Clio is on a mission to transform the legal experience for all. Being the market leader for legal technology means that we have an added responsibility to set the tone for the next generation and to help ensure that technology shaping legal experiences is also serving the greater good. I wanted to recognise that this series is part of that overall mission. Now, for those of you who have been following along, you may be aware that at this time, I typically go into a little bit of a spiel or a talk about what Clio does. So at this point, instead of doing that, I'm going to launch a quick poll because we won't be going into a lot of detail. I know a lot of people do join expecting to hear more about Clio, but today's session will not be about that. I do want to be short and sweet though, because the poll is, there's a couple of steps to it or a couple of options in there. So, first of all, the first option you have is CLEO Manage, our core legal case management solution that helps manage clients, organize cases, automate tedious tasks, and month-end billing, which I know many of you are probably going through right now. CLEO Manage includes unlimited document storage, accurate and easy time recording too, and over 80 different integrations from Xero, QuickBooks, Outlook, NetDocuments, InfoTrack. The list really goes on, and we're constantly adding to that list as well with our open API. You also have the option there, the second option. So earlier this summer, we announced some exciting news, the addition of Clio Grow to our offering worldwide. And Clio Grow enables law firms to deliver a more client-centered experience by automating the client intake process, so that starting stage of the client journey. Together, Clio Grow and CLEO Manage form a package known as Clio Suite. So that's your second option. However, you can also operate on CLEO Manage alone as well. So depending on what your needs are, you can select either option there. And of course, if you're not interested in learning anything more about CLEO's products, that's completely fine too. You can let us know via the last option. Wonderful. So I want to also mention that we know we won't achieve our mission to transform the legal experience for all alone. And that is why we work with 66 law societies and bar associations worldwide, including the Law Society of England and Wales, a relationship we have been working or has been in place since 2018, and the Law Society of Scotland, which has been around for even longer, which has been in place since 2016. Now I'm going to close our poll. So that is enough about the CLEO side of things. So ending our poll. Brilliant. Now I'm back to our topic of discussion for this morning. So hiring for your firm's success. A law firm rises and falls on the strengths of its people. That's why when it comes time to recruit for your firm, choosing the right person to work with you is such an important decision, especially if you're a smaller or a newer firm. But how and when do you start the recruitment process? And how do you ensure that you choose the right candidate? Well, to set the scene for this conversation, I'm going to ask Duane to take us through some recent research Realm has produced. Each year since 2018, Realm have conducted an annual survey with a sample size of 100 lawyers who are broadly representative of the overall demographic of the legal profession. The survey assesses the market from the perspective of attraction, attention, and engagement. So Duane, at this point, I'd like to get you to jump on and to take us through your research.
Thank you, Geraldine. So we first started conducting this research in 2018, and just to give you some context, recruiters don't have the best of reputations, as many of you I'm sure will appreciate. And we found in our early days that we were making suggestions to some of the law firms we were working with as to how to go about recruiting. And some of the suggestions we were making to them seemed novel and sort of wide of the mark. And we realized that to help convince them that our suggestions were well-founded and the right course of action, we needed some data to back up what we were suggesting. And so really the research piece started as a pragmatic solution to a business problem we had, but we had such success with it that we've carried it on year after year after year. And we found the findings have been not only really interesting, but have really helped the law firms we work with to make well-informed decisions when it comes to recruitment and attraction and retention. And the starting point for this, Geraldine, if you can move to the first slide, is this piece here. So one of the first things we ask when we conduct this research each year is for the participants to tell us whether they identify as an active, passive, or inactive job seeker. Now, an active job seeker is essentially somebody who's going out of their way to look for a new job, whereas a passive job seeker is someone, whilst not close to the idea of moving, if the right thing were to come along, is not necessarily taking steps to go and look for that thing. They're waiting for the right thing to kind of come across their desk, as it were. And an inactive job seeker, as the phrase suggests, is not involved in the market and is probably not up for moving. Now, I've sought to present this data on a scale deliberately rather than putting it in a pie chart, because there are degrees, I think, of each of these statuses. So at the most extreme, an active job seeker, on the very far left of that scale, they might be speaking to several recruiters simultaneously and applying for everything and anything. Whereas somebody in that active bracket, but more towards the right, almost verging on passive, well, they may only be speaking to one single recruiter and being a little bit more selective about what they apply for. And similarly, there are extremes in the other categories. So at the very far right of the inactive section, you've got someone who's probably extremely happy and their head is not for turning. But actually, you've got others that would fall into that category who might be more towards the passive marker. And whilst technically inactive, there are ways of piquing their interest. But the important point I suppose I'm making there is that 20% of the whole profession, whilst active, are not necessarily scrambling around the internet desperately looking for a new job. And similarly, those that are passive or inactive well, actually, they can and do still move jobs, but the point is there is a certain way that that happens. Now, pre-pandemic, we'd run this research piece for 2 consecutive years, and these percentages look very different. The active job seeker was 40%, the passive was 40%, and inactive was 20%. But even in those 2 years, it was tough to recruit. The firms that we were working with were not finding recruitment easy. And the simple reason for that was that even with 40% of the profession identifying as active job seekers, there were still more jobs than there were suitably qualified active candidates. The reality being that a large proportion of active candidates are not necessarily the sorts of candidates that those firms want to hire for whatever reason, whether it be because of skill set or experience or whatever it might be. So if you think that with 40% of the profession active, we've now got just 20%, it doesn't take a genius to work out that times are tough when it comes to trying to recruit into law firms. So if we could move on to the next slide, I want to talk about why it looks this way. Now, last year, if you look at this pie chart on the right, 67% of those we surveyed were worried about job security. And so the view that we took was this sweeping change with 20% disappearing off that active marker and now being inactive was probably due to the economic environment people found themselves in because of COVID and the uncertainty. But having just run this research afresh, the results, I think the survey closed just a week or so ago. So, fresh out the box, with only 17% now saying job security is a concern, we would take the view that the fact that the market still looks exactly the same as it did 12 months ago, in terms of only 20% being active and then 40% each passive and inactive, there's more to it. So if we move again to the next slide, we think the likelihood for that is because of this. Now, I say likelihood, I can't say this with certainty because this is the first year that we've actually collected data on this particular point. But this data, and indeed what we're hearing day to day, suggests that savvier firms are battening down the hatches, so to speak, and they are taking proactive steps to ensure that their team are feeling well looked after. And on top of that, there is a culture of counter offers rife within the legal profession at the moment, a culture of firms effectively chucking money at people when they come to hand in their notice to try to convince them to stay put. So these two things are effectively driving up standards. And as a result, you've got more than half of the profession saying that they are actively engaged and effectively comfortable where they work. Which begs the question, how can law firms compete for talent in a market like this? And the answer to that starts on the next slide, please. So each year we do this piece of research. We place the things that lawyers look for when moving jobs, their priorities, if you will, into 18 categories, some of which are displayed on this slide. This graph and the one on the next slide shows the percentage of lawyers that voted each of these categories as very important. Now, this is the first year that flexibility has came out on top. Since starting this research, money and flexibility have always held those top 2 spots, but this year flexibility is pushed to the first spot and pushed quite ahead, actually, as being the most important factor that lawyers consider when looking for a new job. Now, let's just move to the next slide to show you the sorts of things that are important to them. The start reality for any law firm or any employer for that matter is that you can't score 10 out of 10 on all of these fronts. It's just not possible. So what we tend to advocate at Realm is what we call a 2 or 3-pronged attack. The idea being that you are at least competent on all these fronts, but you choose 2 or 3 which you really go to town on, which you master, which you try to be the best at. And those are the 2 or 3 things that then you absolutely shout about. Now, the result of that is that you'll struggle to appeal to those lawyers that prioritize above all else the 15 or 16 things that you are not just that you are only competent at. But the flip side is you will stand a really, really good chance of not only attracting but retaining those lawyers that value most highly the 2 or 3 things that you do master at, that you are best at. And if we go to the next slide, which is just jumping back. Oh, no, sorry. If you could go back, Geraldine, 2 slides. I've sent you the wrong slides, evidently. I was supposed to show this slide again. Ideally, if you're going down that route of having a 2 or 3 pronged attack, you would pick things that are higher up on this list in order to appeal to the biggest possible audience. So that's my starting point. I hope that kind of sets the backdrop for what we're going to talk about today.
Fantastic, Duane. Really, really appreciate sharing that research, and so hot off the press as well. We're all already getting questions. Can we get a copy of the slides, please? So yes, we'll be sending out a link to the recording, and the slides will be included in that as well. So stay tuned for that. At this point, I'm going to invite Alistair and Kim to join us, and we're going to get into the Q&A kind of discussion side of things. So if you do have questions, please pop them into the chat window and we'll cover them off. I'm going to also stop sharing my screen so we're in a nicer bit of a gallery view. Wonderful. So Duane, I think the flipping of the table on job security being a concern is extremely interesting, and it's, as you mentioned, it's going to have no doubt already be having implications on the hiring market. Alistair and Kim, going to pull you into the conversation a little bit now. Would love to know a little bit more, and to set the scene for those that are on the call, context on who you started out your firm with almost a year ago and who makes up your firm right now. Both of you are running separate firms. Kim, we'll come to you first on that.
Yeah, sure. So we started in October or November last year. I can't remember actually. I was thinking about it this morning. But we started with 3. And now we have 5. So we've hired an employee and we have another partner on board. Yeah, we all actually came out of the same firm, so it's been interesting, that part of it. It was not necessarily intended that way, but that's how it's turned out for us.
And Alistair, for you?
Yeah, so for us, we started in December last year, and it was me and Shona, who's my wife. And the way we kind of split the work was that Shona is more on the sort of operations side. So she deals with finance, marketing, everything else. I'm more on the actual legal services. And so since then fast forward to now, we took on a trainee at the beginning of August. So Neelam joined us then. And we had a paralegal for a few months as well, who joined us just on a fixed term basis. So there's 3 of us now.
Great. And going back to what Duane was just presenting, when you were going through that hiring process, is that something that you came across when you were going through bringing on Neelam?
Yeah, so when we advertised in January of this year, and I mean, we had a fairly good response to that. And the thing, it's slightly different, and I'm sure we'll come on to this. Recruiting for paralegals or trainees is a very different experience to recruiting for qualified lawyers. It's still very difficult to find those paralegal and trainee jobs. But we got, we had a really good response. And I think people who were attracted by, perhaps some of the ways we do things here, or the opportunity to do something different. So obviously we're not able to compete with price on some of the larger firms or on salary, but in terms of lifestyle, flexibility, work-life balance, those things were really high up, and the opportunity to be involved in something new. So it's not just about money, I think. Sorry, does that answer the question?
It does. Or I would like to take a little bit of a step back.
Yeah.
Then on how did you decide that a paralegal was who you needed at that time, or what are the things that you considered and weighed up at that time?
So I think that, I mean, it was always part of our plan to sort of take someone on fairly early on. And we knew within a month, I think we knew that we needed that extra support. And I was, you know, we were able to bring across some work from my previous firm. And I was at that point where I just needed somebody to help. And a paralegal made sense because, you know, I was doing sort of work, that elements of the work that could have been done by a paralegal, and that would, having someone to support me on that would just free me up to do a bit more. And of course, when you start a business, there's all those other things as well as the actual lawyering that you need to do. So yeah, it's been great to have that support.
Kim, did you go through a similar, like you didn't go through a similar approach, but how, I believe now you are currently looking at growing your firm. How have you gone through weighing up who to go after and what you need?
Yes, so we wanted, when we advertised for a hire, we've only done it once, and we wanted someone to do primarily commercial conveyancing, but some residential as well. And unfortunately, it was right in the middle of the stamp duty holiday. So conveyancers were not looking at anything and they weren't going anywhere. Well, I guess that's the feeling that we had anyway, that it was a bit of a difficult time, not because they were all happy. I think we all know that conveyancers were having a massively awful time during that time, but just, I guess that they were too busy to worry about anything else. So it was a bit of a difficulty for us, but we knew that we wanted to have a conveyancer, and we knew that we wanted to have someone who was qualified and a few years on, so that they could work fairly independently. And, you know, it's always about finding that point where you can afford to do it. So we would love to have an assistant who basically just works for all of us, and does sort of just general legal work for us, and some of those tasks that we don't necessarily need to be doing ourselves. We're not quite there yet, but we'll watch this space and see how we get on. But we advertised, and we didn't, we probably weren't very organized about it. We knew what we wanted, and we put together an advert, and we you know, put that on socials basically, and just didn't get anywhere. It was just quiet. And then we managed to, we had an old colleague, a friend of us, come and say that she would like to join us. So she did, which took away that necessity to actually start thinking about recruiting in more depth. You know, it wasn't something that we really gave much thought to at all. I don't know whether we kind of had this feeling that you just put up an advertisement and then people will come. They would make it and they will come. Well, they didn't come. So it's not always that easy. And it's an interesting lesson actually on giving it more thought than just doing that. There's more to it. You know, you want to attract the right person. You don't want to be going through it all the time, and you don't want to, you know, spend time in the stress and not have someone there. So I think it's really good to think about who you need, but also what you can offer and how you can make yourself attractive to people that you're wanting to recruit, and the kind of person that you're wanting to recruit. And we can't compete on things that the larger firms have, but there are other things that we have that they don't have, and those are the things that we would focus on in the future.
Great. Thank you, Kim. As a small firm, or as a new firm as well, getting your firm's brand out there from the perspective of trying to reach clients, but now also trying to reach new hires, I imagine is a difficult one. Duane, you probably come across it a lot. You're working with numerous firms. Have you tips for firms out there, and firms that are potentially on our call today, for trying to reach those that are probably more in the passive and inactive sectors that you called out?
Yeah. Well, I think the starting point there is bearing in mind that if that somebody is passive or inactive, they're not going to be going onto Google to search for conveyancer jobs or family solicitor jobs or whatever it might be. So job adverts are not going to ever really pique the interest of these people. So the question is, what might they see online? Well, they're likely to be on LinkedIn. So if you have a good LinkedIn presence, and I don't mean just when you decide to recruit, you throw up some stuff about how great a place you are to work. The algorithm on LinkedIn is clever on that. You know, you need to be building your presence before that in an organic way. That's a good starting point. And if you try to drive the traffic from LinkedIn to a page of your website, a careers page of some sort, which sets out very clearly to the person looking at it, what's in it for them? What would be the benefit of that person that's fairly comfortable in their day-to-day life reaching out to you? And this goes back to my 2 or 3 pronged attack point. And in fact, what Kim was just saying about there are things that Kim's business can compete on, which the larger businesses don't do, making those points very, very clear. And I say this ever so slightly flippantly, but in my experience of working with law firms for over a decade, careers pages have for too long been too much about what the law firm wants from the lawyers it's interested in hiring. You know, you need to be this, you need to be that, you need to be the other. That maybe worked 10 years back when the balance of the market looked completely different, but it doesn't work anymore. So I think that would be the first kind of point I would offer: try to have a good online social media presence that drives traffic to a good careers page. And the second thing I would say, and of course I'm going to say this as the recruiter, but appreciate the value that a good recruiter can bring rather than focusing on the cost. Because if you actually think about it, a good recruiter that specializes in recruiting the type of lawyer that you're after, what is it they spend their day doing? Talking to the lawyers that you're looking to hire. So if you partner up with a good recruiter and show them that you're willing to invest in that relationship, they're going to go out of their way to be a brand ambassador for you in the market and raise the profile of your business and pique the interest of those passive and inactive job seekers.
Duane, could you expand just briefly on that, how you would work with, say, an Alistair or Kim who come to you and say, I'm looking to hire this person. I've tried, you know, the simple posts on LinkedIn to my own network, and now I need help.
There's 2 things, I mean, to put it in simple terms, there are 2 things that we usually focus on delving into. One is, what is it you're trying to achieve? So why do you need this person? So that we can offer some advice around whether or not we think they're looking for the right thing in the first place and what their options are. And then the second thing is, what's in it for them? Once we know those 2 things, essentially we say, right, well, leave it with us. Don't post this anywhere else, because the more far and wide you post it, the more unscrupulous recruiters that are going to come across it. And, you know, that's a whole rabbit hole I can get down, but, you know, I don't think that's a good thing. And just let us go and do our thing. Let us go and be your brand ambassador. Let us go and talk to the people out there in the marketplace that are going to be of interest to you. Let us tell them why they should entertain having a 15-minute conversation with you to give you the chance to bend their ear and convince them that it's worth them considering coming to join you. I'm conscious this isn't meant to be a sales pitch for Realm, so I don't want to go too down that rabbit hole of what we do, but you know, the outreach piece is comprehensive. There's lots we do that's very proactive, is the point, to kind of have those conversations.
Thank you, Duane, and I appreciate that. And I just thought it's an important one to just think about, is what help is out there as well. We have a question here from Elena. How did you set a salary, and what additional costs are there to bear in mind when hiring? So I'm going to put this one, I think it came in when Kim was chatting.
I'm what the addition-
on the salary side, so even getting a salary, figuring that
yeah, again, perhaps not as much thought as we should have given, because you kind of just know roughly what is the market, like what's the going rate. You start with the role that you want, and then thought about the kind of market rate that is for that role. The difficulty is that obviously as a startup, there's a lot of obviously financial pressure, and there's a limit to what you can do. So I think I'm not the best person to answer how you decide, because I think it was a bit random on my side, on our side, how we did it. And I think it probably should have been, could have been a bit better thought out. I think we focused on benefits as well, not necessarily, the standard benefits that you get, but, the flexibility is one of our major pitches, I guess. I'm a mother, one of the other partners is a mother. It's really important for us to be able to work flexible hours, whether that's I work first thing in the morning. People get emails from me at 10, 11 at night, because that's just sometimes what I do. And so that's something that we promote as well as part of it. What was the second part of the question? The first bit was about salary.
Yeah, the second part was, are there additional costs to bear in mind when hiring?
Yeah, so so you've got national insurance contributions, you've got pension, you've got the cost of any additional benefits, you've got the cost of setting them up. So they'll need the tech that they need licenses. So you've got to think about, extra people for Clio, extra people for your practical law subscription, everything like that. So you've got it, and those things can add up. But when you're small scale, it tends not to be so bad. But there are definitely more costs than just the salary. So when you're setting the salary, you don't just think, okay, the salary is this. You have to factor in more on top.
Yeah, Duane, you were going to come in there.
Yeah, sorry for cutting across you, Ken.
Right.
I mean, you make a good point. There are, I think, several other things to consider when taking on a new hire, and to give people an idea, if the route you go down is to use a recruiter, you need to factor in anywhere between 15 to 30% of the person's first year annual salary as the fee, subject to the type of person you're looking for and the recruiter you use. And just another piece of advice that I always give to our clients is to always be conservative rather than optimistic when it comes to kind of forecasting the impact that new hire is going to have in their first year, if you're trying to kind of work out and balance the cost benefit.
Yeah, that is a good point, that onboarding period and ramping up, not to expect them to, be bringing in the cash from day one. That's a very important point to make, Duane.
Because I think one of the worst things that I can imagine is bringing someone on at a salary that it turns out you couldn't afford, and then your forecast was too high, and then you have to make a really awful decision. And I can't even imagine being in that space. So it's better to get it right in the first place, as best you can, so that you avoid anything like that.
Go ahead, Alistair.
I was going to say, no, it's very difficult. It is. I was echoing what Kim says. I guess it is, and that's why it feels like such a big decision, and particularly once you get into recruiting qualified lawyers, because obviously that is quite a big expenditure. But on the flip side, you don't want to be in that position where you haven't recruited early enough and you find yourself underwater. The service to clients suffers, and then you don't even have enough time and energy to recruit. And because you're fighting fires, so it's knowing when to make that call is very difficult. But I think there is a balance. I think I think for us, we're getting to the point now where I know that within sort of 3-4 months, we probably will need a qualified lawyer, just because we're getting towards that 70-80% capacity. Because of the sort of retaining clients we've got, we know that we hope there will be a few more of those coming as well. So we're at that point where we think we can see it coming, and realistically we need to start having that conversation now, or start thinking about it, and then start advertising quite soon, because there'll be then people will have notice periods before they could even start. So it's that, yeah, it is hard, but I think you have to, you can look at your past performance, think, well, I think things have grown in this way so far. Look at what you've got in terms of repeat work, look at, you know, what you've got in the pipeline, what new initiatives you might have in terms of marketing, people you're targeting. And yeah, without getting overly optimistic about it, I think you do have to be realistic, but that's kind of the route we're going down of sort of anticipating future hiring needs.
Yeah, hiring for tomorrow and not for today.
Exactly.
And it's a big risk for newer firms. Have either of you gone down the route or alternative options of where you're not recruiting, but you're plugging the gap with, say, a consultant, even a virtual receptionist, outsourcing, anything?
I was just going to say something similar, actually, that there's other options than hiring a full-time employee. So you don't have to just hire, you know, someone full-time. You could hire an employee part-time, you know, if you wanted a qualified. So don't forget about that. But the consultant option is another one that we thought about. We thought that the consultant option would give us some flexibility if we weren't really sure what the work levels were like in a particular field or a particular area, and you wanted to sort of stick your toes in it, but you weren't really sure that the fees were going to come in to justify the salary. Then the consultant is an option. We haven't done it, but it's still something there that's in the back of the mind on it. I think it can be a good system. I think it works for the consultants, and they can, you know, spread themselves about, I guess. But it can work for us as well when the work volume is not certain.
Could I add to this hiring for tomorrow, not today point? This is some borrowed wisdom, I should just say, from a chap called Simon McCrum. Just to give you a whistle-stop tour of who he is. He was a managing partner of a law firm called Darby's that were headquartered in Oxford. And for 2 consecutive years, I think 2016, 2017, they were the fastest growing law firm in the UK from several thousand. And then he sold them to a PLC at a great cost. And he's open that he made many right decisions during his time as managing partner, but also many wrong decisions. And he's written a book called The Perfect Legal Business. And in it, he kind of makes this point that there's no money to be made from storage. You know, if a file isn't being worked on, it's actually costing you money, not earning you money, and it's potentially costing you your reputation. And actually, you know, there's working on a file, kind of chasing it and, you know, doing something on it because a deadline's looming or because a client's chasing you. And then there's working on a file, you know, doing really thoughtful, detailed work. And from all of that, he subscribes to this idea that actually law firms, rather than needing more files, generally need more lawyers. They need to over-resource work more than they are. And so every law firm that he works with, he basically forces them into recruiting very early on, which is why I know him. So of course I'm going to be an advocate for his approach. But he forces them into recruiting early on to reduce the utilization levels of each lawyer. So that, you know, no lawyers over sort of 70, 80%. And what this means is they can spend more time on each file, thus bill more money on those files, prevent them from burnout, and actually enable them to spend time generating more work. And I promise you, every law firm that he's gone into, without fail, their profit margins always go up as a result of this approach. So my point is, I'm a big advocate of hiring for today and not tomorrow. I don't think it's ever too early to at least consider and think about hiring. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? Because I know from our perspective, I know for a lot of our existing clients, there are things that we could do to help them, that we could suggest to them that would really benefit them. But at the moment, we're too busy with the other things we're doing for them. There's always, if you've got the capacity, you can find ways to fill it, I think. But obviously you have to balance that and not go wild and, you know, recruit 10 people and suddenly find you've got a salary bill you can't pay. But I think there's a lot to be said for that approach.
Yeah, you can get stuck in your mind in a chicken and egg situation. You get stuck in your head going, oh, but the work needs to be there and then I'll hire, or do I hire and then the work comes, and you'll drive yourself mad. in that kind of situation. So I think that if you can at least see the market, if you can at least see that firms around you are busy, if you can see that your clients are asking for a particular form of work, just go for it. Just do it. Just get out there and do it. What's the worst that could happen?
Exactly. A great point, Kim. I was going to say, and all of this kind of goes back then to the client experience and building a client-centered law firm as well. So the more people that are there, the more attention that the client can get. Elena raised a good point here, or a question, and it kind of could relate back to this topic of taking that risk of hiring somebody. Do you have, or have you ever encountered probation periods for your new recruits?
I don't think we had one. I may be wrong here. I don't think we did this time around. I mean, it's fairly standard in contracts that you have a probationary period. I would need to go back and check. I mean, I think by the time we hired, we were sure enough that it was going to work, and also I think part of our process, we wanted to make someone joining the firm feel really welcome, feel that that we appreciate the investment that they've made in us, and certainly with both Neelam and Hannah who joined us, there's an element of risk in joining a brand new law firm, and sometimes a firm will be very welcoming, and then the contract sort of is at odds with that welcome that they're giving and some of the language. And so it's how you sort of have that balance between that we need to protect ourselves obviously a bit, but at the same time without making that person feel, this is not quite the welcome I'd anticipated. So I mean, I think I always wonder what would happen in a probationary period that would really make you, between hiring a person and the end of their probationary period, that would make you actually end their employment. It would have to be something fairly drastic that you hadn't seen in the hiring process. I don't know what anyone else thinks about that though.
I've always had mixed views about probationary period. I'm an employment lawyer predominantly, and sometimes I took the view that a probationary period was pointless because you've got a 2-year window in reality where you can, if something is not working out, you can dismiss someone without them being able to bring an unfair dismissal claim generally. There are some exceptions to that, but you have that 2-year window anyway. So I agree with Alistair, like you put a probationary period in there, you're welcoming someone in and then slapping them in the face and saying, well, you're on probation and I might chuck you like in 3 months. And it's not just the investment that they're joining you, but they often have left somewhere, so I feel like we have an obligation to them as well, that we need to, there's expectations that we have of them, but then also that they will have expectations of us, that we won't just, get into this probationary period and just decide, oh, it's not working out, I'm going to bin you off. So I think with probation, but then on the other hand, a probationary period is good because it allows you both to make sure that it is the right fit, because you don't want to have someone where that's not a right fit. So I don't know whether having a probationary period in a contract is the way to deal with that. I kind of would rather have just open conversation with the employee, and that's obviously easier, I think, in a smaller firm, that you can have that open conversation and have it as a continual thing that goes on from when they start, through their first year, second year. It doesn't need a probationary period for you to have those conversations and to come to a point perhaps where it's not really working. So yeah, I'm not sure. So when like I think you're right, Alistair, employment contracts can be a bit of a slap in the face. So when we did ours, actually, I started with the usual template that I used for contracts and then rewrote a whole bunch of it into normal language and into a more positive way. So I took out a lot of that stuff, which is interesting because when I do them for other people, I don't do that. Yeah. So maybe I should, write employment contracts that are a bit politer.
There's definitely a market for it, isn't there? Because they do seem they are worded in a very sort of draconian, sort of controlling way, aren't they? You will do this, you will be here from these times, you will, and
yeah. I think if you don't do this, then it's gross misconduct. If you don't do this, then we'll fire you. I mean, there are certain elements of that you need to have in there.
Yeah.
That you've also got to protect yourself as a business. So, but I think that there's a better balance that we can strike.
And even just phrasing it in a different way, exactly. You can have the same effect, but actually putting a bit more of a human language, I think makes sense.
And so one of the things that we plugged into our employment contract was unlimited holiday. So the way that we've written that is to really push the message that we are trust-based. So, the holiday clause says you can have whatever holiday you want. We want you obviously have to take your statutory minimum. And as long as you are there for your clients, as long as you are performing your role and you're not letting, you're not swanning off to Malta for 3 months at a time. Like, obviously that's not going to work, but there's an element of just trust, and you put that into your contract and you're building that trust from the start.
Thank you, Kim. That's I think kind of relates back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier around culture, and that how to get across your culture and your values to new hires. So that's another element, another kind of element that you can build into getting your culture across outside of your website and your careers page. How important is that culture fit for firms today, especially for smaller firms? How do you, first of all, identify what your culture is, like your main values, how have you gone through identifying what those are our 3, 4, 5 main values, and that's what we really need for someone to kind of fit into those values and that culture. Kim, you've talked a little bit about some of your values. How did you decide that that's definitely what the route we're going?
It was always important to us from the beginning. I think there's nothing worse than a toxic workplace, and toxic workplace comes, I think, from not having an understanding of what the firm is about, and not having an understanding of how it is expected that people treat each other. And that's how you create this, this toxic environment. And so I think when it comes to recruiting, it's really important to be, I think this is one point where you can be very clear about what it is that you want from the person that you're hiring. Be very clear that this is the culture that we have. This is the culture that we promote here. And if you're not going to fit in it, then don't bother. We don't want, I don't know what you call it. We don't want like a poison. We don't want a poison in the garden. So I think it's about being upfront from the start about that. And it's important, because I think good firms can be damaged, sometimes irreparably, by the development of an extremely toxic workplace. And I think a lot of the time that comes from just an absence of cohesion, and an absence of direction, and an absence of care for the people that you're working with, and care for the clients. And so for me, the working culture is crucial.
Thank you, Kim. Duane, is this an exercise that you would go through with folks that come to you for your help?
And the advice I give them always starts with me telling them how I failed miserably on this point when I set up Realm. I set out to grow a recruitment business that was different, to the norm, and ended up making all the same mistakes. And so I tell them that it's never too late to try to do things differently. And so about 18 months into our life cycle, realizing that it didn't feel like it was quite working, and that maybe we were trying to be something that the people that were sat physically in that room at the time weren't, that we had to do something. So we just got everyone around the table for a long lunch and said, look, what is it that you like about coming here? What is it that you think makes us us? Is there any feedback that clients you've worked with have ever given you? And we can extract from that kind of what it is that makes us us. And through that process and a follow-up conversation, we kind of boiled that down to a group of values that those people that were in the business at the time all rallied around. And, you know, it may be coincidental, but it feels like that was the start of a really positive upwards trajectory for our business then. So I share that story with our clients and I talk them through that in a bit more detail. And a couple of them have gone on that same journey of going, do you know what? These values that are sat on our website that we've plucked from thin air, they don't mean anything. Let's put something together that really reflects us. And then once they have that, they can then work backwards from those values to build in interview questions that test whether or not that aligns. To give you an easy example, one of our values is that we are refreshingly dynamic. We have a big emphasis on movement forwards and on self-development and growth. So we ask a lot in interview settings about people's failures in the past and how they've responded to them and what they've learned to test that.
Great. I think that's a really important thing to do before your interview process. And we had a question that came in there on approaching interviews and what questions to make sure to ensure that they're the right fit. Kim, Alistair, have you questions that you include into the typical interview process that you would ask?
I don't know if we had sort of standard questions. I think asking about things, well, the one Duane mentioned, where people have failed in the past, is a really interesting one, because they're expecting to be asked about their successes and, you know, what have you. And so I think we did ask people, what, you know, tell me about a time you found difficult. How did you cope with that? And whether that was in a personal situation or work situation, what was it? To just try and get a gauge of, you know, how they as a person cope with things when things don't work out well. And I suppose to reinforce that message that we're okay talking about that, and it's not, you know, it's not something to be ashamed of. But it's those questions that you kind of really delving into someone's character, because I do think for most roles, I mean, obviously for some roles you will need someone with certain levels of technical expertise, but a lot of that can be taught or can be acquired, whereas someone's attitude and approach and their just general mindset, I suppose, are actually something that's far more difficult to teach. And if someone's already got that, then it's worth building on the other bits as well. Yeah, I don't know. Kim, did you have any standard questions?
No, so I've only ever been through an interview process once, and it was at my previous firm when I was looking for a secretary, and I had been self-typing for like a decade because I have control problems. But I did need some help, and it was the first time I went through the interview process, and I found it really, really difficult. I found it really exhausting and really tough. But and I think that if I was making a plan now, I'd be thinking about the role that I want to fulfill, first of all, whether it's a short-term thing or a long-term thing, because I think that makes a difference as well. But I would be looking to ask questions that would try to get to the bottom of how flexible the person was, and how, the same as Alistair said, that they can learn and that they are open to learning. So I'd probably ask questions about that revolve around teaching and learning situations, you know, what sort of training they do, whether they have an interest in learning, what sort of courses they go on. I'd have to be looking for an interest in learning. I think I would be, looking for someone who could listen. So it might even be setting up a question or dropping in some information and then asking it later on to see whether they were also listening to what I was saying.
You'll often see that actually on the tech side. I know it's not the law firms, but from hiring on the tech side and going through interview processes, you'll be giving resources, and then just to check, have they referred back to those? Have they listened and looked at those resources and brought it into their interview or presentation or such?
Yeah.
I think
I think I'd also ask questions about that would lead to like to check creativity. I'm struggling to find the word that means where you can think of something for yourself. What is that? Initiative? Like, you know, someone who would do something off their own bat and wouldn't just sit there and wait to be told what to do. But I would ask questions that would be like, what do you do in this situation? Or how would you do this? And just testing their initiative and creativity.
One thing we did in interviews was, so we had Zoom interviews, and we asked people to, as a sort of technical exercise, but so testing their legal skills, but also communication. We sort of send them I think it was some restrictive covenants from an employment contract, and give them 10 minutes and get them to come back and explain them to us as if we were a client, which was a good exercise in seeing how they coped with things, you know, that were just dropped on them, but also how they can communicate sort of fairly complex things in a manner that can be understood. So that was quite interesting.
I'm conscious of time, but
yes,
if I could build on that, I mean, I'd just echo the importance of trying to introduce situational things like Alistair suggested. I think they're a brilliant way of testing people, but we obsess about culture, and I think rightfully so. But I think we have to be very careful to make sure that in an interview setting, we're testing culture and not personality, because I think these are two very different things. You know, for example, we have people at Realm who are very outgoing and open and assertive. And we also have people that are very self-contained and maybe introvert. And so they've got polar opposite personalities, but they're both still aligned with our culture. And the reason I say that is, I think just as much as, you know, the answer people give to questions is important, is the way they answer them, and not to fall into the trap of almost looking for people that are just like you. And the example that I give to try and illustrate this in a legal setting is, family lawyers stereotypically are outgoing creatures, and it's very relationship driven. Private client lawyers are very technical, and it's, you know, black letter law. If a family lawyer happens to be conducting an interview looking for a private client lawyer, they may inadvertently, you know, dismiss the best private client lawyers because they're answering their questions a little bit more short than they would like and without the level of enthusiasm. And that's more of a personality thing. It doesn't mean they're actually not right for the job or aren't the right culture.
The great point you raised, Duane. I'm conscious of time. We've a minute left. We did have a comment that came in here from Charlene, who thinks the most important question to ask a potential employee is about themselves. Who are they as a person, what they enjoy, etc. Having this approach will make the process much more relaxing and comfortable as well. So yeah, that's another idea to you're also trying to sell your firm to those new hires as well as them trying to sell themselves to your firm. So I'm conscious of time. I'm going to cover off on one final question, a quick round the room, as we all would like to do on these ones. Final question: what one tip do you have for firm owners on the call right now when it comes to starting the process for their next hire? So they may have already hired somebody, but their next hire, what tip have you got? Duane, might come to you first for that one.
Get going with it now. Start planning for it before you even have the need to recruit. So you've got your strategy in place, your recruiter of choice ready to go, the whole lot. Thank you, Duane. Alistair?
I would say take the time to get the right person. You know, if you run a recruitment process and the right person doesn't come up as part of that, then do something else, try a different strategy, get a recruiter, whatever it is you need to do. But it is a big decision, and it's important to get it right.
Kim,
I would say think do a lot of thought beforehand about exactly what role you need. So what is it that you're missing? What are the tasks that you need to be done? And how much that, I would say focus on that first, and your budget.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim, Alistair, and Duane. I'm just going to quickly share my screen very, very quickly because we have a nice announcement to make. So our annual flagship conference, the Clio Cloud Conference, takes place every October. And this year's event takes place over 4 days, the 26th to the 29th of October. It'll be the 9th event, and it'll all be virtual. Each year we bring together thousands of legal professionals from all around the globe, and that's made a little bit easier when it's virtual. And we've just announced two of our three keynote speakers. So we've got Arianna Huffington, Thrive Global founder and CEO, founder of the Huffington Post, and one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. We have Ian Manuel as well joining us, and Ian is a survivor of excessive child punishment, author and criminal justice reform advocate. And that's on top of Scott Stratton, who was already announced, a best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and expert in social marketing. So along with all of these speakers, you'll be able to attend Clio product sessions, networking, legal tech contests, and roundtables, you name it, along with some fantastic entertainment as well. So early bird passes are on sales. You can purchase up until Friday the early bird pass, and if your plans change, we do provide refunds up until September 24th. So I just wanted to call that out quickly, as I know many of you on the call might be interested in some of those fantastic keynote speakers. And finally, just a final thank you to Alistair, Kim and Duane for joining us today and for sharing their knowledge and their experiences when it comes to hiring for their firm and for firms that they work with. I really do appreciate this session. We'll be sending out the recording after the event, and our next session will be the end of September. And that will be all about you're building your own personal brand. So we'll send you more details on that as well. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful day wherever in the world you are.